My memory is not as sharp as it used to be. And also, my memory is not as sharp as it used to be.
Welcome to the 10 building blocks of chinuch. We're up to number 6. Building block number 6 is memory. Now here's the question. This is not a painful question. Question number 2 is painful. Question number 1, as a mechanech, an educator, a teacher, how much effort, 0 to 10, 0 is the least, 10 is the most, how much effort, time, energy, resources do we pump into teaching information, delivering information to our children, to our students? And I think you all agree dedicated teachers put in somewhere on a 0 to 10 scale, about 15, 20. So break the scale. Okay, here's the second question, and it's painful. How much effort, 0 to 10, energy, resources, time, do we invest in teaching our children ways to retain what they learn? So I've asked this to many audiences, many educators, mahanchin, principals, and I would say the average answer is in the range of 0 to 3. Very rarely ever more than that. And it's a sad statement, because if that's really true, even partially true, then what are we planning for when we're teaching, if we're not teaching how to retain what they learn? And the sad answer is we're planning not with intent, but by default, we're planning for the children to forget what they learn. So the question now begs, well, how do we fix that? Is there something about memory that we need to look into? And perhaps more importantly, do our sages have what to say about this subject? And what we're going to discover is really the following. Before the printing press, how educated was a person? If a person had to be measured for how well educated they were before the invention of printing, what would the answer be? And the answer is as good as their memory, because there weren't enough manuscripts around to be able to refer to, so whatever you retained is how well educated you were. Now, if we take the question a little bit more seriously, for us, B'nai Yisrael, it's a much more serious question. You see, we had an actual prohibition to write down the Torah Sheba'al Peh, the oral law, which means that the entire Chumash itself, which is only headlines, to use the mashal, the metaphor of Rabbi Shamshon Raphael Hirsch, the entire Torah are really headlines, because there's not a single statement, not one verse that is intelligible, meaning that you can't understand a single word or verse because there's so many deliberate grammatical inconsistencies. Lashon Zachar instead of Nekeva, Nekeva instead of not Zachar, female instead of the gender of male. Oh, it's Lashon Rabim instead of Yachid, Yachid instead of Rabim, it's a plural instead of singular. Bereshis Bara, Bara, oh, Bara is singular. Elokim, oh, that's plural. Oh, so it should be Baru. No, but Elokim is one, Hashem is only one. But then why does it say powers? You can't find a single pasuk that doesn't scream out, Darsheni. Explain me. Because HaKadosh Baruch Hu deliberately wrote the Torah on the dictate to Moshe Rabbeinu so that anyone studying his text could not take it seriously. They would be forced to ask questions, use their mind. And in asking questions, they will be forced to search for the answers, which is part of the Torah Sheba'al Peh, the oral law. Now, the oral law eventually was written down. It was considered a hoiras shah, which means it's an emergency measure. This was not the original intent. It's plan B. Plan A was you rely on your mind. Oh, so guess what happens to your memory if you have to rely on it? Is it going to get weaker or stronger? And the answer is it depends on how much you value the information, which we're going to talk about. So the Torah Sheba'al Peh, when it was written down, was how much after the Torah was given. And the answer is, Hashem gave us the Torah at Har Sinai, Mount Sinai, in the year 2448 from creation, approximately 3,326 years ago. That's this event over here. Oh, Matan Torah. At this point, HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave to Moshe Rabbeinu all the Torah over the next 40 years. This picture represents the 40 years in the Midbar in the desert, and he wrote down the entire Torah, but the missing information was given over orally. So when was it written down? So let's move down the timeline. The time of Joshua, Yehoshua, and the Tekufa, the period of the Zkanim, the elders, and then the Shoftim, the judges, and then the Melachim, the kings, starting with Shaul HaMelech, King Saul, King David, and his son Shlomo HaMelech, who built the Bais Rishon, the first Beis HaMikdash, the first temple. There's destruction of the Bais Rishon. Wow, there's a lot of turmoil over here, and the Jewish people are still retaining the missing information of the Sefer Torah. Nothing's written down, it's all oral. Galus Bavel, the Babylonian exile. Really, the Jewish people, for the most part, have been exiled from our land. We're living in Bavel, in Babylonia, or today's Iraq, and we have Sefer Torah, Sifrei Torah, Torah scrolls, but we don't have anything in writing in terms of the Torah Sheba'al Peh, the oral law. Oh, that's being retained up here. Really? Oh, and that's almost 1,000 years later. Prus, Galus Prus, that's the exile of Persia, followed immediately by the story of Purim, Megillas Esther, that's 2,400 years ago. Oh, Bais Sheni, the building of the second Beis HaMikdash, the second temple. Galus Yavan, the exile of Greece, and the story of Hanukkah. Chorban Bais Sheni, the destruction of the second temple. Wow. That's when we went into the Roman exile. Oh yeah, Galus Edom, the Roman exile. And we're spread throughout the entire Roman Empire. The orange parts of this picture depict where we were spread throughout the Roman Empire. Oh, and in all that time, our agenda was mostly survival. And yet we retained the information. That requires a lot of discipline and an excellent memory. How do they do that? Well, actually, it's because of that period that Rabbeinu Yehuda Anasi, the then president of the Jewish people, known as Rabbeinu HaKadosh, he wrote the Mishnah. He collated from all the statements of the Torah Sheba'al Peh, the oral law, from Sinai till now, and he organized them into 6 sections, known as Shisha Sedarim, 6 sections. The translation is actually more accurately 6 arrangements, 6 organized sections. And under them, he gave 63 labels. Each one has a tractate name. And in each tractate, he plotted the Tariag mitzvahs, the 613 mitzvahs, which relate to that section of the 6, and then the subsections, the 63 tractates. And then he subdivided every tractate into numbered chapters, which were then subdivided into numbered paragraphs. Each paragraph is known as a Mishnah. Oh, so now you've got the Torah Sheba'al Peh, the oral law, in writing for the first time. 63 tractates under 6 sections. Great! Now we have the missing information, right? No, we don't. Why not? Because if you open up a Mishnah, will you be able to understand everything you need to know from the actual writing in the Mishnah? Or is the language so terse, so cryptic, such a kitzur lashon, it's so abbreviated that it's assuming you know much more information than is actually recorded in the Mishnah? And this was such a serious problem that within 300 years, the Gemara was written as the Perush, the explanation of the Mishnah, downloading the missing information of the Mishnah. Oh, so the Mishnah was written in a way that you were forced to ask questions. And even when the Gemara was written, it was written in question-answer format, problem-solution. And it often would find a problem with a solution, and now you go into a seeming tangent into trying to solve the problem and the solutions problem. Oh, the entire Chumash was written so you can't understand it, so you're forced to think, ask questions, be engaged. The entire Mishnah was written so that even though it preserved the Torah Sheba'al Peh, the oral law, it nevertheless forces the student to ask questions. I don't have enough information to make sense out of a single paragraph. That's deliberate. But at this point, now comes our real question. We've got the writing of the Torah Sheba'al Peh, but how do they memorize all that information till now? How do they retain it? And even afterwards, how do they retain it? And even in Shas, in the Talmud itself, our sages very frequently would interrupt the sugya or at an end of a sugya, I should say, not interrupt, and give you a short line, usually in parentheses, starting with the word siman, which really means a sign or a trigger. And it will give you a list of several words, or in some cases 4, 5, 6, or 7, or 8 words. And what is a siman? A siman is a sign. It's a visual picture of something in your brain that is meant to be not the information itself, but is meant to trigger the information that it represents. Like an exit. Exit, I don't know, 14B off the throughway to Airmont and Muncie. That's not the actual exit, it's a sign. But it tells you, the driver, where to steer the car. Oh, so the sign is not the information, but it tells your brain where to go to find the information. And so you will find throughout the entire Talmud, many hundreds of times, this statement, siman, and then it gives you a list of words. And what we're going to look at now is to try and understand, our sages were into simonim. They were into, how do you retain a lot of information, possibly even in a short amount of time, and be able to retain it over a long period of time so you don't forget what you learn. Because as much as it is important and vital to deliver information, but if I have no way to retain it, and in the time for 1,300 years, 1,300 years, from the time of the writing of the Torah till the Mishnah, 1,300 years we were retaining the Torah Sheba'al Peh, the oral law, up here. It's only in the last 500 years since the invention of printing press, now, oh my gosh, people's memory doesn't even have to be exercised so much because you can rely on books. And in a certain sense, that's a tragedy. In a certain sense, it's really plan B. Plan A is rely on your mind. But your mind needs help. So this is what we're here to talk about. How does memory really work? So I'm going to share with you an interesting statement, and that is, there is no such thing as a good or bad memory. Now that sounds pretty controversial because many people listening to that will say, one second, I know that I do not have a good memory. Well, actually, there really is no such thing as a good or bad memory. There are memories that are trained, and there are untrained memories. Yeah, memory is very similar to a muscle. Flex it, guess what? Get stronger. Oh, really? Well, let's demonstrate that. You see, your brain, created by HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the master of the universe, is so brilliant, it's actually taking in every piece of information that your eyes are noticing. So you might be through the lens of this camera looking at the speaker, listening to the words coming out of his mouth, but in actuality, most of the work your brain is doing is not screening in the information you want to focus on, it's screening out much more information and sound and images that your brain is not interested in focusing on. So actually, the way your brain is working constantly in every single waking moment of your lives is subconsciously, it's noticing much more information and detail, pictures, props, physical items, a board here, a tie, you might even notice the microphone, lapel. There's so many things going on in your brain that's taking in. You may even be hearing sounds that are coming from the street or people in the audience. Your brain is hearing and seeing, experiencing, sensorially retrieving, receiving so much more information that you are spending more time trying to focus on not what you want to focus on, but on what you don't want to focus on. You're getting rid of, screening out all the information you don't need. But where is that information going? And the answer is it's all there. It's all there. I'll give you a very interesting example, and you know the example yourselves. Now this used to be, in my parents' generation, the question, where were you when JFK was assassinated? And they all remember. So now we're going to switch because that was a long time ago, but there might be people listening, viewing on this camera who do remember that. So let's switch to something sadly a little bit more recent. Where were you at 7:40 a.m. on September 11th, 2001? Oh, Twin Towers. So you probably remember where you were, what you were doing, if there were other people around you, what occasion it was for you. Maybe you were teaching that morning, getting into work, or you were on the commute. Now, what's interesting about this question is that not only do you remember the specific information about Twin Towers coming down, And if you had access to a TV, which, by the way, in case you didn't know, TV stands for time wasted. That's, you have to pronounce it, of course, with a Yiddish accent. But if you saw the images on the television where the Twin Towers were coming down, then what ends up happening is that you remember not only that incredibly different, unusual tragedy, but your brain takes in all the surrounding details and it gets printed with the tragedy. So let's understand what are the mechanics of how your brain remembers information. Because the surrounding information is not nearly as important as that major piece of seeing Twin Towers come down. And the amazing part here is that when something is unusual, your brain has to come up with a whole new file. You see, when you pass cars on the street, this is happening so many thousands of times, probably a week, your brain does not need to pay special attention to any one particular car. If Has v'Shalom, if God forbid you see a crash, that is so unusual that that gets printed in your memory, and you will probably remember the exact location, which store it was outside, or which part of the street, and some of the cars and the people and what they were wearing around you at the time. Oh, because when something is unusual, your brain has to pay a whole new level of attention, and it needs to create a file that was not in existence till now. Now, here's where it's interesting. You don't have to wait for a Twin Towers, Has v'Shalom, or a crash or anything else extremely unusual for you to have to remember something, because every person, no matter how intelligent or unintelligent we are, we all have creative imagination. And even if you don't have you're not known specifically for a very creative imagination, doesn't matter. You know why? It's something you can develop. Especially in today's world of cartoons and technology and animation. Oh, you can easily reconstruct in your mind something unusual. And when you do, if you associate it with something that's new, that you want to learn, that you want to retain, you want to remember, you will have recall. You'll be able to retain it. So those are some of the mechanics. Now I'm going to break it down into the law of memory. And here it is. The law of memory. Now that's the incorrect spelling. Here's the correct spelling. This is the real law of memory. And I will show you. Here's the correct spelling, because we're going to remember it slightly differently, and this is an acronym. These are the Rosh Tevos. These are the letters that are going to represent the mechanics of how recall, retention, remembering actually works. Number one, learn. There's no substitute. There's no substitute for the actual learning. Absolutely none whatsoever. We're going to see soon that the L in learn also stands for love. You want to love what you learn. In fact, if you don't love what you learn, your brain will only be learning it perhaps for a test, or because you're in fear of parents being disappointed with you, having put in so much money into your education. There could be lots of ulterior external reasons, but if there's an intrinsic love for the learning, oh, that makes it valuable. So for example, if you think about it, have you ever wondered, how is it that doctors, when they're passing their medical exam after 7 years of really working hard, they have to remember thousands of very complicated names of different parts of the anatomy, the human body. And that's before you get to all the even more complicated names of pharmaceutical products and the names of all these medicines. Oh my gosh, how do you do that? And the answer is, oh, it's valuable. You love it because it's valuable. Your certification, your graduation depends on this. Your ability to heal people, the ability to earn a living. Oh, interesting. So the more you value something, and especially if you love it, the learning is going to be more penetrating. There's no substitute for the actual learning. I mean, think about it. How do actors and actresses remember monologues, so many lines? I mean, they all have such excellent memories, and the answer is, oh, it matters a lot to them. There's a lot of value. They love it. Oh, if you love something, you'll do it again and again. You won't tire. Oh, so Loving learning is big part of L. Learn and love it. You have to value it. Why do lawyers who sit for the bar exams, they have to remember hundreds and if not thousands of case studies? That's incredible. How do they do that? All the different laws and applications, how do they do that? And the answer is, oh, there's no substitute for learning, but it's valuable to them. And because it's valuable, especially if you love it, oh my gosh, it's going to penetrate. Last example, and I find this probably the most penetrating of all, you can go into a grocery store that has many aisles and possibly between them all tens of thousands of products, literally. And if not tens of thousands, many thousands of products. And not only that, but each one has a price, and each one is a different brand, different make, different size, large, small, medium. And you can ask someone who's working there for a number of years the price or where to find, and he'll tell you exactly which aisle, and he'll tell you the price on this item, even though the price keeps changing every few months. Oh my gosh, how does he know all that? And the answer is, oh, he's spent so much time in that store, going up and down the aisles, packing the shelves, etc., that he's been doing this a few hours a day, 5, 6 days a week, for hundreds of days a year. So there's no mystery. But guess what? If he loves his job because he's the owner, or he gets paid very well, or he gets a lot of accolades, a lot of appreciation from his boss, and he loves the customers, oh, you enjoy your work as well? Oh, so guess what? You'll love knowing that you know. So this is even before we get to memory strategies. Number one of the lore, L-O-A-R, of memory is learn. There's no substitute for that. Hours a day, if necessary. But O is number two of the memory mechanics, and that is organize. Organize your learning. Now, what does that mean? If you know before you're going to start learning a Mishnah, or a Sugya in Gemara, or a chapter, a Perek in Chumash, or one of, let's say, the Tarek Mitzvahs. We're going to talk about this another time. If you know before you're learning that you're going to have to organize it, you will be learning on a different level. You will not be learning like you usually do. What does that mean, organize? You're going to be looking for structure. You're going to be asking yourself in the back of your mind, perhaps subconsciously, I'm going to learn this perek right now, but I'm also going to, at the end of the perek, I'm going to write a summary. A very short summary, that's called organizing, part of organizing, of the main points of that chapter. Oh, interesting. If you know up front that you're going to summarize what you see as the main points of that Mishnah, of that chapter in Chumash, or Nach, or this story, or this particular Mishnah, or this Sugya, who says what and who argues back on what their svaras, what there's reasoning, or which pasuk which verse they are quoting to support them. If you know up front that you're not only going to be learning, but you're going to organize it, and in organizing it, you're going to be looking for a particular trigger word that will be a way to remind yourself of other information that that word represents. So then the level of learning, is it going to be the same as you usually have, where you're just trying to break down and figure out what everything says? Or in the back of your mind, because you know you're going to end up organizing it and summarizing it, guess what's going to happen? You're going to be learning at a different level. And what's that level called? Paying attention. Learning is all about paying attention. Shallow learning means I'm paying very shallow, surface learning attention. Depth of learning means I've paid enough attention to detail that I'll start noticing when there are subtle changes or differences. And that's where learning becomes not just broader, but deeper. So paying attention when you're learning is a very important strategy towards, and we haven't gone to the real strategies yet of actual memory, but these are all preparation. Once you know that you're going to be organizing this information, what you're going to be looking for is a trigger word to summarize this Mishnah or this Perek, this chapter. And once you've done that, you're going to be able to associate. And all this will add up to recall. That's basically the entire mechanics. Now I'm going to break it down a little bit more so you actually see, you're going to experience the difference. So Associate means you're going to have something that's already in your brain that you can easily find, but you want to remember something new that you haven't learned before, only now, and you want to be able to find that. How do you do that? And the answer is, you've got to take the new information and put it somewhere where you can easily find it. Well, how do you do that? And the answer is, you want files in your mind. And if you've got lots of files in your mind, you're going to then be able to associate the new information to the files that are already there. So I'm going to give you a quick example of how that actually works. So you start to realize, oh, memory is all about flexing a memory muscle. And all it takes is discipline and motivation. That's really what discipline is. All it takes is discipline / motivation. / is a grammatical term. I don't mean it in violence. You have to be politically correct today in everything you say. So memory is associating new information to something you already have in your brain. So we're going to create files in the brain. That's what a simon is. A simon is a file. So you can easily find the information that you put inside that file, like computer files, or for those who still remember, files in an office where you'd have a filing cabinet. We want to have a filing cabinet in our brain so we can easily find information and associate it in an unusual way without having to experience an accident or twin towers. We can recreate something. It doesn't have to be violent, it just has to be unusual, strange, weird, different. So that your brain says, oh, I haven't had an image like that before. I need to file it in its own place. And now you'll easily be able to find it because there's no other file like it. And if you can create hundreds, if not thousands of unusual files, your brain will be able to find it. And we're going to give you a lot of examples. You're going to see this in actual action in yourself. So, organize, associate, and that's all what simonim are about. A simon is a trigger. It's a sign. Now, to bring this down to earth in terms of how our sages have told us, how important is it to remember what you learn? So let me share with you an astonishing statement. I'm sure you're familiar with it. It's a little bit of a strong statement. You'll find it in Eruvin, page 54b, where the Gemara famously says, Ein ha-Torah niknas ella b'simonim. The Torah can only be niknas, that means acquired. Acquired means you own. It's mastery. It belongs to you. Ein ha-Torah niknas ella b'simonim. You can only own what you learn if it's done with simonim. Now, obviously, you're going to say, well, yeah, that's true at the time that it was written, because in the time of the Gemara, the Torah Sheba'al Peh was still predominant, and that's true. To remember the Torah Sheba'al Peh, you had to have simonim. But even to contain a chapter of Gemara in your mind, you still have to have a system to put the information together. So let's look more closely at this statement, because our sages give us a verse in the Torah to substantiate this claim. Ein ha-Torah niknas ela b'simanim shenema, as the Pasuk says, and it quotes the Pasuk from Hazinu in Perek Lamed Beis, chapter 32, in Dvarim, Sima b'fihem, place it in their mouths. Now the Gemara plays on the word sima and says, Al tikre sima, don't read it as sima, place. Ela simana, place into their mouths a simon, a sign in their mouths. Really? Who's the Gemara talking to? To the students or to the Rebbeim, the teachers? Oh my gosh. The Gemara is talking to the teachers. That I have to have a strategy for teaching the children how to put a simon in their mouths. And you read Rashi. Rashi on the word simonim says, oh, Ein ha-Torah niknas ela b'simonim, says Rashi, those are simonim of all the shmuais, all the different statements of each of the Tanaim and the Amoraim, that when you string them together, if you've got a simon, a trigger word for each of those statements, so you don't have to remember the whole statement just to have a trigger word for it, guess what? Now you have to just make some sort of storyline that will connect the simonim together, and you have stringed in your brain the information that will trigger off all the rest of the information. I hope I'm making myself clear here, because this is so important. So comes along Chazal. I want to share with you actually the Vilna Gaon. The Vilna Gaon, unbelievable. You'll find this in Milas HaTorah. That's a sefer actually written by the brother of the Vilna Gaon. And he claims that his brother, the Vilna Gaon, made the following statement, that whenever the Gemara brings a pasuk, a verse, to support a statement they made, it elevates their statement to a deoraisa. So accordingly, when Chazal went out of their way to show you, Ein Torah nignas ela b'simonim, shene'emar, sima b'fihem, al tikra sima ela simana, what Chazal are telling us is that mideoraisa, I as a teacher have an obligation not only to teach Torah to our children in the word vishinantam levanecha, which Rav Rishonim most agree, that is the makor, that's the source for the mitzvah of teaching Torah to children. Actually, the word doesn't mean teach, we're going to look at that soon. There's no word there that says teach whatsoever, but that's unfortunately the classical translation, so just so that you know what I'm talking about, and we're sticking with it for now. Vishinantam levanecha, oh, that's the source for teaching. But I also have another obligation to help the children retain, remember, recall. Because what happens to my self-esteem if after weeks, months, or years I don't remember what I've learned? How do I feel after graduating high school and then best medrash and then 3 years of kollel, 5, 10 years of kollel, and now you place a blank piece of paper in front of me and say, please could you write any chelik of the Torah that you feel you've got a kinyan on? It could be a Chumash, or a chaimish of Chumash, or it could be a sefer of Tanakh, Masechta of Gemara, or Mishnayos, or Seder of Mishnayos. Please, and just tell me any area of the Torah that you feel you've got such a good kinyan on that you're willing to be quizzed on any area of that particular part of the Torah. So, Hashem, I don't want this as a kitrug. I'm just asking a simple question. How many pieces of paper will be filled up and how many will be blank? It's scary. Let's take our own sages seriously. Trust Chazal. 2 key words here. Trust Chazal. Ein Torah nignas ela b'simanim. If that's really true, then I've got to take this really seriously and figure out, how do simanim work? What does it mean, a trigger? And how do you organize the Mishnah and then associate it to a file that's already in your brain so that you can have instant recall? So that's really what we're looking at right now. So actually, what did we just do? I took a word L-A-W, law, and I changed the spelling. That created a lack of integrity in your minds where you said, whoa, that's not how you spell it. And your mind has to create a file for that because that's just unusual. It's not super unusual, it's not graphically ridiculous and visually out of the ordinary, but it's still not what your mind has ever seen before. And then we ended up taking these same letters, which almost sounds like the word law, except there's an R at the end, and we substituted each letter for a full word. Or rather, each letter represented a full word. Learn and love the learning. Organize, A, associate using simonim, and R for recall. Now here's another level of R, and that is review. In Hebrew, the term for review, and it's important to look at Lashon HaKodesh because it's a perfect language. HaKadosh Baruch Hu created reality with this language. So when we look at the word review, we need to understand it in Lashon HaKodesh because it will reveal the mechanics of Chazara, of review. So there's 2 types of review. You see, why do I have to review after I've already recalled it? If I already know it, does that mean I still have to do Chazara? And the answer is yes. You see, check out the Abarbanel. In Pirkei Avos, Perek Hey, usually depends on which edition, usually Mishnah number Chaf Beis or Chaf Aleph, depending on which edition of Mishnayos you're using. And you will find there, Ben Chamesh Shanim Nemikra. Children should be reading around about 5 years old, and with their reading ability, accuracy and fluency in knowing shroshim, prefixes and suffixes, the shimushim, be able to decode. That means look at a pasuk and break it down. Oh, so once you've got that skill set, for Ben Chamesh Shanim Nemikra, we're not looking at the small print right now, and Hilchos Melamed Tanokas, it's actually Chamesh Shanim Shalemim, even up to 6. Im Chalash B'Datay, it can even go up to 7 or 8, but we're not talking about that right now. Let's just take the Mishnah raw as it says it. Ben Chamesh Shanim Nemikra, Ben Eser LeMishnah. Oh, it's 10 years old you start learning Mishnayos. Ben Chamesh Esrei LeTalmud. At 15, you're learning Gemara. Oh, so that means 5 years is devoted to Tanakh. So actually, the word recall, starting with the letter R, also refers to review. And we're going to look now at the word in Lashon HaKodesh, because biblical Hebrew created reality. Baruch she'amar v'haya olam. Oh, so Hashem spoke and then the physical universe existed. Oh, so what created reality? Oh, Hashem's speech. Oh, so the words created reality. Oh, so we're going to look at the words in Lashon HaKodesh for review, because they're going to reveal the mechanics of review. Because what we're going to discover is there are really two types of review. You see, there's a review where you want to go over the same information as many times as it takes till you own it. You have it in your pocket, you understand it clearly. You've paid enough attention to be able to break it down, and now there's a new level of review, and that is a cumulative review. Which means that even though you now own it, you've got it in you, even with a simon, even with a trigger word, nevertheless, over time, you want to continue reviewing with less frequent intervals. This is actually the Rambam in Hilchos Talmud Torah. You'll see it there. Oh, now let's understand how the Mishnah works in Pirkei Avos. Perek Hey, Ben Chamesh Shanim LeMikra. At 5 years old, you're reading. What's the next demarcation line in the child's curriculum, so to speak? Oh, Ben Eser LeMishnah. Now is 10 years old, starts learning Mishnah. Oh, so there are 5 years dedicated to Tanakh. Look up Hilchos Melamdei Tanakos and you'll see in Yerideh Chelik Gimel, oh, it's talking about spending 5 years learning Chumash and Nach with a lot of review. In most cases, the kids will know it Baal Peh because they're learning the trop, they're learning the cantillation notes, the musical intonations, so they actually sing it, which is a whole new level of intelligence that's being coupled with the learning, and that level of learning, of singing, penetrates the information much deeper. That's the Gemara in Megillah, Daf Lamed Beis. You'll see there where Tosfos brings it's important to sing one's learning, and he quotes there that actually there used to be, we don't have it anymore amongst the Teimanim, I do believe they do, are actual cantillation notes for every single Mishnah. Not just in the Chumash, but every single Mishnah, the Torah Baal Peh. Okay, so singing definitely helps. Oh, so now at 10 years old, now what do? Is I concentrate on Mishnayos. For how long? Ben Chamesh Yisrael Talmud. I don't start learning Gemara according to Chazal till 15. Oh, so I'm spending 5 years on Chumash and Nach, 5 years on Mishnayos, and then I learn Shas Bavli. The next demarcation line is getting married, Ben Shmon Esrei Lechuppah. Whoa, so I've only got 3 years to finish Shas Bavli? Well, if you finished all of Tanakh, and you've also finished all of Mishnayos, you have the entire backbone of Shas Bavli, of the Babylonian Talmud. And that's why it really, not in theory, but in practice, it should really only take 3 years to be able to go through the entire Shas with a decent understanding of it, because you've already got the entire backbone. Mishnayos is a perush to Taryag Mitzvahs, which is contained in Tanakh, or in Chumash at least. Okay, so now here's what the Abarbanel tells us on that Mishnah. The Mishnah tells you when to start learning. It never tells you when to stop. Says the Abarbanel, because Chazara is for the rest of your life. Which type of chazara? Will you keep having to remember what you've forgotten? No. Second level of chazara is a cumulative chazara. That is where you're doing less frequent intervals of chazara in order to not forget what you already worked so hard to remember. Oh, that's the purpose of the second level. And it's actually in the words of the Torah. Because where do we find in the Torah the obligation to teach Torah in the first place? So as you know, Rov Rishonim agree that the mitzvah of Talmud Torah is in the pasuk V'shinantam levanecha, which unfortunately we don't translate according to Chazal. So I'm going to ignore the translation that we usually have and just take what Chazal tell us. What's the word shinun? Because that's what V'shinantam means. Shinun, interestingly, has two meanings. Shinun both means repeat, from the two-letter root shein, which is actually a tooth. Oh, that's interesting. What does your tooth do? Oh, your tooth repeatedly chews, crushes the food in preparation for digestion. So, shenayim means twice. Sheni, 2 times, second. Oh, so the whole concept of shinun is repetition. But interestingly, shinun has another word. According to Chazal, shinun also means to deepen. Shinun means to sharpen. Because When you are sharpening your mind, how do you do that? And the answer is, you've got to do repetition first. What does that mean? If you learn a parak of Chumash, so you know that parak, you learn another parak, and another parak, and another parak, guess what starts happening to your mind? As you repeat the information again and again and again, your brain is now able to do something it could not do before. It can compare and contrast. It can analyze, compare similarities, contrast differences, and analyze subtle nuances, subtle differences between the use of one word in one pasuk and the same word being used in a different context in another pasuk in another verse. And that leads to shinun, deepening your understanding based on sharpening your mind. What is sharpening your mind? You can, when you sharpen a knife, you're able to cut more finely. What is Tosfos busy doing? Almost all the time, he's challenging your mind by showing you, 1 second, how can the Gemara say this over here, where we've got a Bryce and a different Masechta that seems to have the same mechanics, but a different psak, a different application. And then Tosfos, having completely stimulated my mind into, yeah, that's, wow, oh my gosh, that's a contradiction to our Gemara over here. And then what does Tosfos do? Brings you a fine-tuned distinction that discriminates between the two cases, and suddenly you chap, oh, and that's called pilpul. What is pilpul? Well, it comes from the word pepper. What is pepper doing? Oh, pepper is sharpening your taste. It refines your mind to notice smaller details and to be able to contrast the differences and compare the similarities so that your mind sharpens itself and understands subtleties. So analysis is really paying attention to detail. So the two levels of review is number one, v'shinantam levanecha, teach to your children, is not what the word says. It says repeat to your children. And what's the purpose of repetition? For the sake of leading to sharpening. Oh, but how do you get to sharpening? And the answer is, you have to have a massive amount of information that you can borrow from to really sharpen your mind. We're not talking about that now. We can talk about that at a difference, but if you want more information on the subject, I wrote a book a number of years ago called The 1 Minute Masmid, and I quote from Chazal and many Gedolim, especially amongst the Achronim, who talk about Iyun and Bekiyah, so to speak, where we understand that the purpose of Bekiyus, the purpose of covering ground and sequential learning, that means start at the beginning, go to the end, and then review. No big secrets over here. Sequential learning, start at the beginning of the Masechta, go to the end, and then review it. Go again and again. And the purpose of that is so that your mind has enough information to now go into Iyun, to go into depth, go into detail, go into analysis. Compare similarities, contrast differences, and sharpen your mind to be able to understand the distinctions and the subtle differences between one case and another case. Okay, so those are the two levels of review. Review for the sake of the kinyan, to acquisition, and then in review, a cumulative review afterwards to not forget the acquisition. But that's not taking into account what this particular presentation is really about, and that is how do we create memory systems to not forget what we learn. So I'm going to share with you a couple of very simple games you can play. It's a strategy you can do with about 4-year-olds, 5-year-olds, and older if you want. And that is, I call it the magic bag game. It's very simple. It's a game that can develop, I wouldn't call it photographic memory, but going in that direction. How does that work? You'll put inside a bag, let's say, I don't know, a spoon, a clothes peg, a key, a coin, an eraser, a pen, maybe a yellow highlighter, a lid of a small container, a plastic cup, a number of different items, random, it doesn't matter what. And then you ask your 3, 4, 5-year-old to put their hand inside the bag and to hold something in their hand, not take it out yet, and ask a number of questions. Is it sharp? Is it smooth? Is it rough? Is it long? Is it short? Is it hard? Is it soft? Is it made of metal or wood or maybe of plastic or cardboard? And you keep asking different questions. Now, what's the purpose of asking those questions? What are you getting the child's mind to do as they're holding this item? They're not looking at it, they can't see it, it's inside a bag. Or if you want, you can blindfold the child have them put their hand in the bag and take something out without looking at it. Ask them all these questions. Is what you're holding short or long, soft or hard, rough? Is it smooth? Is it made of metal or wood or plastic? Keep asking questions. Then at the end, the last question you're going to ask is, what is it? But that's not the most important question. You see, all those previous questions are doing what to the brain of the child? Without looking at it, the brain of the child is using the fingers, which is an interesting expression. Our sages use the word fingers, al-yaday, through the hands. You see, you interface with the physical world through your hands. Your hands tell your brain what you're touching. So the child is holding in his hand, and you're directing the brain of the child to pay attention to detail, because that's learning. Learning, we said earlier, is lots of levels, and each level is a different level of paying attention to detail. And the more you train the mind of a child, now I use the words deliberately, train the mind of a child, because there's no such thing as a child that's unintelligent. I don't even believe that much in children being learning disabled. It might mean that they are not strong academically, but guess what? Out of all the different intelligences out there, al-pi darkai, follow the way of the child. Oh, so each child has a different intelligence, modality, learning style. Oh, so if I can hit the kid in his strength, even if it's not academically strong, but he's strong spatially, kinesthetically, orally, visually, oh, he's strong with math or with language or emotional intelligence or musical intelligence, oh, guess what's going to happen? The kid will learn. He'll be able to figure it out. Oh, so I'm not a big lover of learning disabilities, because I have been working with kids for about 30 years, and I have discovered for myself that I never met one who can't learn, if one can find darkai, his way. And what you're going to see now is, by playing this game of, I call it magic bag, there's nothing magic about it, but child takes out and starts paying attention to detail. You're training their mind, excuse me, I look much better that way actually. You're training the mind of the child to pay attention to detail. So we're up to the magic bag. So just really to make it easy for you, I brought a plastic bag. Really, you can choose something that looks much nicer. Happens to be, this is free advertising for Rockland Kosher Supermarket, but I just wanted a plastic bag so that you understand how easy this can be. You can choose any bag you like, have the child put their hand inside, and the most important question you're going to ask them after they've been asked, is it long, is it short, is what's in your hand soft or hard? You can ask the questions much slower than I'm asking them. Is it metal? Do you think it might be cardboard, or maybe it's plastic? Or is it short? Is it long? Is it rough? Is it smooth? And then after you've finished with all the questions, which as we said is just to really fine-tune the mind's eye to noticing what the fingers are touching in order to pay attention. That's the key word. Two key words. Pay attention to detail, which is part of analysis, but it's also preparing the mind for building its memory muscles. So after you finished all those questions, then the most important question comes, not what is it, that's obvious, in this case it's a spoon, but what can it be used for? So obviously if it's a boy, the first thing he'll tell you is to flick food at his brother across the table. I'm just joking, of course. The first thing he's going to say, well, it's to dip it in yogurt. Okay, what else can you use it besides dipping in yogurt? Well, I can stir. Very good. What else can you use a spoon for? Well, yeah, catapult, okay, we've done that one. What else can you use a spoon for? I guess it could be used as a wedge to hold a door open. Oh, good. What else can it be used for? And you just keep asking the same question. What else can it be used for? There's no right or wrong. On the contrary, this is not about right or wrong. We finish with the accuracy of the mind paying attention to, if you want to call it vertical learning, but what we really want to do is think out of the box and get the mind to be much more creative and imaginative. And by asking what can it be used for, the mind is obviously going to shoot for the most obvious functions that a spoon is associated with. But when you ask the question, what else can it be used for? What's the assumption in the question? It has other uses. They may not have been designed directly for those other uses, but once you ask the question, the assumption is directing the mind of the child to think, what else can this be used for? And in doing so, the child will come up with another answer, another answer. The more creative they are in their imagination, the more you're preparing their mind to be able to come up with all sorts of images and strategies, which is actually helping memory, but it's also helping the child to learn how to analyze, to think out of the box and think about applications beyond what we usually would think. So that's an example with a spoon. So you can take random items from the kitchen, from your classroom. It can be a cup that the child is feeling. He's got to think through the shape. Is it plastic? Is it metal? And of course, right at the very end, when you come to what use does it have, he can think of multiple uses it has. Take stationery from the teacher's desk, with her permission. You can use, in this case, it's a credit card. Kids would love that one. What use does it have? Well, you can use it for a ruler. What else? You could flick things with it. What else can you use it for? Besides getting money out of a machine, etc. So you have the child thinking in lots of different ways. I'm just going to pull out these items from the bag that I put in here, just to show you can take almost anything from the environment. An egg, well, it's not a real egg. A highlighter, a battery. What I like using is also an ice, to take an ice, put one letter which is three-dimensional into the bag, the magic bag, for the child to feel. And you tell them in advance that amongst the different things in the bag, there's always going to be a letter. This way, the child is expecting to find a letter and knows to think about its shape. Because remember, the hand is inside the bag, so the child's not necessarily looking at it. You can even have the child blindfolded if you like. And while they're feeling it, they've got to come up with the shape itself, and hopefully it'll come up with a race. What else do we have in here? Oh, here's a paper clip, and here's an example of a cufflink, which I thought was a good idea, because one of the questions you can ask while they're looking in their mind's eye and holding it in their hand and their fingers, and they're going around the contours of the object to try and figure out what it's made of. Is it sharp, soft, rough, smooth, etc.? Does it have any movable parts? Now, the child might not actually notice it, but if he puts both hands in and wants to feel it, which he can, there's no rules against that, what he may end up realizing, it does have a movable part. He may not be familiar with this, and that's fine, because that will be a teaching moment. That means when it comes out, and we can ask him, what do you think this is? And if he doesn't know, we can teach him. It's a cuff link. And if he knows what the word link means, and he knows what a cuff is, well, a cuff is a Hebrew letter and it refers to the cuff of a shirt, and it can refer to the cuff of your trousers, or in America, of your pants. And in that sense, the link part, and you show the child, how does the cuff link through the cufflink? So this becomes just a moment where you're interesting the mind of the child to pay attention to items which he might not be familiar with. So this is a way to nurture the natural curiosity of a child who's very young, 3, 4, 5 years old, and it's a game you can play at home, you can play it in the school, you can play it in recess, and it's a great way to fine-tune the mind of a child to pay attention to detail. That's what this magic bag is all about. So here's another activity. It's a game which you can play when you're traveling in the car or in the classroom. You can go around the class. And I'm going to share with you a strategy which will help the children to have close to a photographic memory. It's not really photographic memory, but it's going in that direction. So you've played the game I Spy many times, and here's a similar game. When I went to Eretz Yisrael, I packed in my suitcase, and you say what you packed. My tefillin. Then you go to the kid next to you, or your son or your daughter, or the next child sitting next to that student in the classroom. And how does the game go? He has to say, when I went to Eretz Yisrael, I packed in my suitcase my tefillin and my Chumash. And the kid next to him says, when I went to Eretz Yisrael, I packed in my suitcase my tefillin, my Chumash, and my tape recorder. Okay? And then it goes to the next kid, and he has to remember all the items in sequence. So what ends up happening is you get some kids who start falling out because they can't remember the sequence perfectly and they're out of the game. How do they feel? Not too good about themselves. And after a while, they might not actually even like the game that much. So here's a different nuance that when you inject this one nuance, changes the whole game, and you're creating winners out of almost all the kids. is much harder to lose this way because you're showing them how do you link information. And the answer is visualize it and associate each item in a strange way. So, in my suitcase, I packed my tefillin and my chumash and my, what was the next item? Oh, tape recorder. I think you can still get those. The British Museum, I think they have. You should be able to get one. A tape recorder. And the next kid says, oh, and I took my pencil case. Okay. And the next kid says, my Shabbos hat. Just making this up as I go along. It doesn't matter what the kids say. So now what we want to do is teach our children, how can you link these items in a funny way that has your brain creating a whole new file because you've never seen these objects this way before, that you will have recall, association, recall. So watch this. When I went to Eretz Yisrael, I packed in my suitcase my tefillin. So the next item you'll probably remember is my chumash. So what I'm going to imagine is my tefillin straps are strapped around the chumash, rather like an octopus is holding onto something. And so I see the straps holding onto the chumash, and I'm trying to open up my chumash, and the straps are holding it back. I finally open up my chumash, and a tape recorder comes flying out from inside the chumash and bangs me on my chin, and then starts singing the psukim inside the chumash. Now, quickly start from the beginning. What came after tefillin? Can you see the tefillin straps around the chumash? And when I finally open up the chumash, what happened? Oh, you can see the tape recorder come flying out and bang you on the chin, and then start singing the trop from the chumash. Can you see that? Oh, and what happened next? Oh, we've got a pencil case. Oh, so how are we going to fix pencil case into the story? Oh, so what I would imagine now is that a pencil case actually comes out of, you'll see an aerial coming out of the microphone, and it becomes a pen. Can you see that? An aerial coming out of the microphone of your tape recorder, and it becomes a pen, and it starts writing in midair, but you can actually see the writing. And what it's doing is it's actually writing the words that the tape recorder is singing. Oh, so you got the tefillin, the chumash, what happened after chumash? Oh, tape recorder, how do you remember that? Oh, banged your chin, you saw it open up in front of you, and it's singing the trop. And then what came out of the tape recorder? Oh, from the microphone came out an aerial, which was really a pen or pencil, and started writing the trop. And then, oh, how are you going to fit a Shabbos hat? Well, I would perhaps have the Shabbos hat hanging on top of the pencil, which is really the aerial from the tape recorder. And it doesn't matter how many objects you go around in the classroom, teach the children how to make a funny story to link each item with the previous one, and they become connected. In memory systems, they're called linking. This particular system is called linking. Some call it stacking, where you're stacking one item on top of the other, and you're making the connection, a link, in such a funny, unusual way that your brain has never seen it that way before. Your brain has seen tefillin probably thousands of times, chumashim thousands of times, a pencil case, a tape recorder, a Shabbos hat, thousands. So your brain doesn't need to put a special place in its mind for these items. You see them all the time and don't pay much attention. But what you cause your brain to do when you come up with a funny story is you make your brain pay attention to the details, and now it's stuck in a whole new file. So this is a fun game that you can help the children develop their creative imagination, because that's the key here. If you just use creative imagination, which is not dependent on intelligence, it's dependent on creative imagination. And everyone has an imagination, and how creative you are, well, everyone can be as creative as they want to be. There's no limit. So this is how you take simonim, triggers. These would be trigger words in the case of this particular game. But what we're going to do is we're going to do this with Chumash. And you can do it with Mishnah, you can do it with Gemara, you can do it with any subject you want. Learn the information. If you love it, that's even better. If you're going to love it because you know that you're going to be able to retain it, oh, that gives it a whole new level of intrinsic motivation. That's not external. It's not for prizes. It's not for a siyum at the end, which I encourage anyway. But you don't need prizes and praise when the kid is motivated from the inside out, not the outside in. Oh, so the discipline and the love of learning will come because he knows in advance that I'm going to be able to remember this, and I've got fun ways to connect. I want to help you understand that this is not so innovative as it may sound. There's a sefer, it's called Shittat HaShilov, which is actually written by Rabbi David Smith of blessed memory. He was actually the Rav in Vilna after communism fell. He was a Shasiyid. He used to actually come visit us in Gateshead Yeshiva, where I learned. He used to come once a year, and he would fair the boys. He finished 14 blot a day. He'd finished approximately twice a year, Shas twice a year. And he wrote a sefer, Shittat HaShilov, based on the Vilna Gaon, which is, it's going to sound very controversial to have to say this. The Vilna Gaon, as you probably know, if you study his writings, he was very encouraging that his students should know grammar, should know languages and music. I don't want to go into too much detail because I'm going to sound very controversial myself. But this was the Vilna Gaon. And the Vilna Gaon, interestingly, he was the one who was behind Shittat HaShilov, which is how to organize information and then relate it. So apparently the Vilna Gaon had hundreds of pages of notes of how he would organize information. When you write down your learning and you organize it, you are deepening the penetration of the learning, and it becomes yours so much more than when it's someone else's words or notes. So based on Shittat HaShilov, Rabbi David Smith explains how to make these interesting connections. So I don't want to say more because you can tell me you don't believe it. Ayin b'sefer Shittat HaShilov of Rabbi David Smith, Herzal, on that subject. A second point I want to share with you to also kind of validate the concept that we're describing here, which is visualization. I was once having conversations going back about 25 years ago with Rabbi Sheit, Shlita of then was the Blueberry Hill Shul in Monsey. And Rabbi Sheit was Mishamish Reb Moshe Feinstein Hatzal for about 13 years. He was very close to him. He was a Talmud of Reb Moshe Feinstein. And he told me that he once asked Reb Moshe that it wasn't kind of fair that Reb Moshe had a photographic memory, and most of us don't have a particularly good memory, and so he has like this unfair advantage. So Reb Moshe looked at him somewhat surprised, says, I don't have a photographic memory, which was even more surprising. So he said, well, but you seem to remember everything you learn. And so Reb Moshe said something very interesting, very revealing. He said, number one, I'm mispor. I'm very awed by whatever I learn. Oh, that's interesting. Do you remember the first level of learning? First level learning, L for learn, is also the same letter that we use for love. Oh, if you're mispor, you're amazed, you're in wonder. These are Hashem's words. These are the words that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave to Moshe Rabbeinu. And Moshe Rabbeinu gave them to Yeshua, and Yeshua to the Zkanim to the Nevi'im. Nevi'im, Masru Alanchi HaKnesset HaGedolah. Oh, these are HaKadosh Baruch Hu's words. Oh, different value. And you love learning. Oh, so you're mispor, you're amazed, you're awed. So that's a whole different level of penetration, number one. Number two, said Reb Moshe Feinstein, of blessed memory, and this is like mind-blowing, he would visualize his learning. And he brought up the Mishnah in Pirkei Avos, which brings the pasuk, Kol hashochech davar echad mimishnasai, anyone who forgets one item from their learning, ma'alav of the pasuk is applied to that person, ki'ilu mischayev b'nafshay, as though he's forfeited his soul. Whoa, talk about guilt trips. If I forget what I learned, I'm like, whoa. Shenema, and we have a pasuk to back it up. And he quotes from Perek Dalet in Parshas V'eschanan, Hisham elecha, warning you, be careful. Pen tishkach et hadvarim asher ra'u einecha. Hisham elecha u'shmo nafshech me'od. Be very careful, guard your soul exceedingly, in case you forget what your eyes saw. That's interesting. That pasuk, you look it up in the Chumash, you'll find is referring to Ma'amad HaSinai. And Rabbi Meir is saying what he learned from his Rebbe, Rabbi Akiva, who learned from his Rebbe, Rabbi Eliezer, who learned from his Rebbe, all the way back to Moshe Rabbeinu. Kol asher cheach davar echad mimishnasai, ma'alav hakasav kilu mischai b'nafshu shenema, hisham lecha u'shmo nafshech me'od, pen tishkach et hadvarim asher ra'u einecha. That's going on a pasuk on Ma'amad HaSinai. No. This pasuk is also being applied to learning anything. Visualize it.